The day I closed on my 2-bedroom bungalow, my phone exploded with 17 missed calls from my mother. When I finally answered, she didn't congratulate me. She screamed that I'd ruined everything. My father grabbed the phone, voice cold as winter, saying I was a selfish disgrace. My brother Tyler chimed in from the background, calling me a traitor to the family. I stood in my new empty living room, keys still warm in my hand, realizing that buying my first home had somehow made me the villain in a story I never agreed to be part of. I need to back up and explain how I got here, because this nightmare didn't start the day I bought my house. It started 6 months earlier when I casually mentioned to my parents that I was finally ready to buy a place of my own. My name is Jaden, and I'm 32 years old. I work as a software engineer for a tech company in Austin, and I've spent the last 10 years of my life doing everything right. I lived in a cramped studio apartment that cost me $900 a month. I drove a used Honda Civic that I bought for $6,000 cash. I packed my lunch every single day, skipped vacations, and invested 15% of every paycheck. While my friends were buying new cars and taking trips to Europe, I was watching my savings account grow, dollar by dollar, toward a single goal: owning my own home. After a decade of sacrifice, I finally had $60,000 saved for a down payment. I was so proud of myself. I thought my parents would be proud too. I was wrong. My older brother Tyler is 35. He's married to a woman named Brittany, and they have 3 kids, an 8-year-old daughter, a 6-year-old son, and a 3-year-old daughter. Tyler has bounced between jobs his entire adult life. He's worked in retail, tried being a personal trainer, sold insurance for 6 months, and currently claims he's starting a landscaping business that never seems to actually start. He and Brittany live in a rental house that costs them $1,400 a month, which they constantly complain about not being able to afford. Here's the thing about Tyler. Our parents have bailed him out financially his entire life. When he got his girlfriend pregnant in college and dropped out, they paid for everything. When he wrecked his car, they bought him a new one. When he couldn't make rent, they covered it. When his credit cards got maxed out, they paid them off, over and over and over again. And me? I never asked for a dime after I turned 18. So when I told my parents I was house hunting, I expected them to be happy, maybe even a little proud. Instead, my mother Linda got this strange look on her face and said we needed to have a family meeting. That meeting happened on a Sunday afternoon, 3 months before I closed on my house. I drove to my parents' place in the suburbs, expecting maybe they wanted to give me advice about inspections or mortgage rates. Tyler and Brittany were already there with the kids running around the backyard. My father Robert sat at the head of the dining table like he was running a board meeting. My mother sat next to him, hands folded. Tyler and Brittany sat across from me, and I immediately noticed they looked nervous. That should have been my first warning sign. My father cleared his throat and began. He said that Tyler's family was struggling. The rent on their house had gone up to $1,600 a month, and they were having trouble making payments. He said that as a family, we needed to support each other in difficult times. Then he looked directly at me and said that since I was in such a good financial position, I had a responsibility to help. I asked what kind of help they meant. Maybe I could loan Tyler some money to catch up on rent. My mother reached across the table and put her hand on mine. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She said that a loan wouldn't solve the real problem. What Tyler's family needed was stability, a real home. And since I was buying a house anyway, why not buy one big enough for all of us? I sat there, confused. Big enough for all of us? My father explained it, like he was laying out a business plan. I would buy a 4 or 5 bedroom house with a finished basement. Tyler's family would live there temporarily, just until they got back on their feet. It would probably only be 6 months or a year. I'd have help with the mortgage. They'd have a stable place to raise the kids, and everyone wins. I looked at Tyler. He wasn't making eye contact. Brittany was staring at her hands. I said no. I said I'd worked 10 years for this, and I wanted my own space. I was buying a house for myself, not to become a landlord for my brother's family. I offered to help them look for more affordable rentals, or maybe loan them first month's rent and deposit on a cheaper place. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. My mother pulled her hand back like I'd burned her. She said she was disappointed in me. She said that after everything they'd done for me, raising me, feeding me, supporting me through college, this was how I repaid them? By turning my back on family? I pointed out that they hadn't supported me through college. I'd gotten scholarships and worked 2 jobs. My father's face went red. He said that wasn't the point. The point was that family helps family. He said I was being selfish and short-sighted. He said that someday I'd need help, and I'd better hope someone was there for me. Tyler finally spoke up. His voice was quiet but bitter. He said I'd always been the favorite, the smart one, the successful one. He said I'd had it easy while he'd struggled. He said I owed him this because our parents had always given me more attention, more opportunities, more love. I was stunned. I had no idea he felt that way. And even if he did, that wasn't my fault or my responsibility. I stood up and said I was sorry they were struggling, but I wasn't changing my plans. I left without saying goodbye. For 2 weeks, they didn't speak to me. Then the text messages started. My mother would send me listings for big houses. My father would send me articles about family values and supporting each other. Tyler sent me a long message about how his kids asked why Uncle Jaden didn't love them anymore. I ignored all of it and continued with my house search. I found a perfect 2-bedroom bungalow in a quiet neighborhood in South Austin. It had a small yard, hardwood floors, and a renovated kitchen. It was exactly what I wanted. The asking price was $280,000. I made an offer, it was accepted, and I scheduled the closing. I didn't tell my family the closing date. I didn't tell them what kind of house I'd bought. I just hoped that if I kept quiet, they'd eventually drop it and move on. I should have known better. The closing went smoothly. I signed about 40 pages of documents, got my keys, and drove to my new house. My house. I walked through the empty rooms, planning where my furniture would go, imagining my new life. I felt proud and accomplished and free. Then my phone started ringing. I saw it was my mother and let it go to voicemail. She called again and again. By the time I checked, I had 17 missed calls. I finally answered, and that's when everything exploded. My mother was screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She said Tyler had driven by some addresses I'd mentioned months ago and saw a for sale sign changed to sold. He'd checked public records online and found my name on a closing for a house on Willow Creek Drive. A 2-bedroom house. Where exactly did I think Tyler's family was going to sleep? In the backyard? I tried to explain that I'd told them months ago I wasn't doing this, but she talked right over me. She said I was cruel. She said I was selfish. She said I deliberately deceived them. My father grabbed the phone. His voice was ice cold. He said I was a disgrace to the family. He said they'd given me every opportunity in life, and this was how I repaid them. He said if I didn't fix this immediately, there would be consequences. I asked what he meant by consequences. He said I'd find out. Then Tyler got on the phone. He called me a traitor. He said I'd ruined everything. He said his family was going to be homeless because of me, and he'd never forgive me. I tried to stay calm. I said they'd known for 3 months what my decision was. This wasn't a surprise. If they'd given notice at their rental based on some assumption I'd change my mind, that was their problem, not mine. Tyler's voice went quiet and mean. He said it was too late for that. He said they'd already given their landlord notice. They were being evicted in 2 weeks, and they were coming to live with me whether I liked it or not. I said that wasn't happening and hung up. I stood in my new empty living room, hands shaking, and realized that buying my first home had just started a war with my entire family, and somehow, I was the one they'd painted as the villain. I blocked their numbers. I know that sounds harsh, but I needed peace to think. I spent that weekend moving in. I'd been slowly buying furniture over the past month, keeping it all in a storage unit, and now I could finally set up my space exactly how I wanted it. I bought a comfortable couch for the living room, a queen bed for my bedroom, and turned the second bedroom into a home office since I work remotely 3 days a week. I hung pictures on the walls. I organized my kitchen. I set up my gaming computer in my office with my nice monitor and mechanical keyboard. Every item I placed felt like a victory, a reward for 10 years of hard work and sacrifice. By Sunday night, my house felt like home. I unblocked my family's numbers, thinking maybe they'd cooled off. There were dozens of angry text messages, but I didn't respond. I figured they'd have to face reality eventually and find their own solution. Monday and Tuesday were peaceful. I worked from my new home office, took walks around my neighborhood, and started to relax. Maybe this would blow over after all. Wednesday morning, I was in my kitchen making coffee when the doorbell rang. It was 7:30 in the morning. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door and froze. Tyler stood on my porch, grinning. Behind him were Brittany and their 3 kids. And behind them, parked in my driveway, was a 20-foot U-Haul truck. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Tyler spread his arms wide. He said, "Hey bro, they were here." Where did I want them to start unloading their stuff? I found my voice and said they weren't unloading anything. I'd told them they couldn't stay here. I started to close the door, but Tyler stuck his foot in the way. He said I needed to be reasonable. They literally had nowhere else to go. Their landlord had already rented their place to someone else. They'd been staying in a cheap motel for the last 3 nights, and they were out of money. I wouldn't really turn away my own brother and his kids, would I? I said I would, and I was. I told them to leave. That's when Brittany started crying. Loud, heaving sobs. The kids looked terrified and confused. The 8-year-old, whose name is Emma, asked her mom what was wrong. The 6-year-old boy, Connor, started crying too, just because his mom was. Neighbors were coming out of their houses, walking their dogs, getting in their cars to go to work. Everyone was watching. I was the guy on his porch turning away a crying woman and scared children. Tyler put his arm around Brittany. He looked at me with this expression of hurt disbelief. He said he couldn't believe his own brother would leave his nieces and nephew homeless. He said it loud enough for the neighbors to hear. An older woman from across the street called out, asking if everything was okay. I was trapped. If I physically forced them to leave, I'd look like a monster. If I called the police, I'd be the guy who called the cops on his own family. The social pressure was suffocating. Brittany looked up at me with red, puffy eyes. She said they had nowhere to go. Their parents said I'd agreed to let them stay. She said they just needed a couple weeks to find a place. That's all. 2 weeks. The little 3-year-old Sophie was holding a stuffed bunny and looking up at me with these big eyes. I felt my resolve cracking. I told myself it was just 2 weeks. I could survive 2 weeks. Then they'd be gone and this would be over. I held up 2 fingers. I said 2 weeks. That's it. They needed to find their own place in 2 weeks, and then they had to leave. Tyler's expression changed instantly from hurt to happy. He clapped me on the shoulder and said I was the best brother ever. He called back to the truck that it was okay to start unloading. 2 other guys I didn't recognize jumped out of the truck and started pulling out furniture. I stood there watching as they carried boxes, beds, toys, and bags into my house. Brittany immediately took over the second bedroom, the one I'd set up as my office. She said the kids would sleep in there. Tyler said he and Brittany would take the couch. I tried to protest about my office, but Brittany said the kids needed a bedroom more than I needed an office. She started moving my computer and desk into the corner of the living room. Within 2 hours, my peaceful new home looked like a disaster zone. Kids' toys were scattered everywhere. Their furniture didn't match mine and was covered in stains and scratches. Boxes were stacked in every corner. The kitchen table was covered with their stuff. The living room had a blow-up mattress for Tyler and Brittany in addition to my couch. Tyler's friends left. The house suddenly felt very small. I had to log in for work at 9. I set up my laptop at the kitchen table since my desk was now blocked by kids' beds. Tyler turned on the TV loud. The kids started fighting over a toy. Brittany was unpacking in the kitchen, moving my things around. I couldn't concentrate. I had 3 meetings that day and could barely focus on any of them. That night, the reality of what I'd agreed to set in. The kids ran around screaming until 9 at night. Tyler and Brittany got into a loud argument about something while I was trying to sleep. The 3-year-old woke up crying at 2 in the morning. The walls were thin, and I heard everything. I got maybe 4 hours of sleep. Thursday was worse. I came out of my bedroom to find that Tyler had used my expensive gaming computer without asking. He'd downloaded some game that took up 50 gigabytes and changed all my settings. When I asked him about it, he shrugged and said he got bored. Brittany had completely reorganized my kitchen. She said my system didn't make sense for a family. My spices were in different cabinets. My dishes were rearranged. She'd thrown out some of my food to make room for theirs. I opened my fridge to find all my groceries, either eaten or pushed to the back. I'd bought food for one person to last a week. They'd gone through most of it in 2 days. When I pointed this out, Brittany said she thought we were sharing food now. She said they couldn't afford groceries and assumed I'd provide for the kids. I realized I'd made a massive mistake. But I'd said 2 weeks. I could survive 2 weeks. Friday afternoon, I came home from running errands to find my parents' car in my driveway. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach as I walked inside. My mother was in the kitchen cooking. My father was sitting on my couch, watching TV with Tyler. They had suitcases. There was an air mattress set up in what used to be my home office, taking up the remaining floor space between the kids' beds. I asked what they were doing here. My mother smiled and said they'd come to help with the kids. She said Tyler and Brittany needed support, and this was what family did for each other. I said they couldn't stay here. The house was already too crowded. My father looked at me with disappointment. He said after all they'd done for me, I couldn't spare a little space for them. They'd raised me for 18 years. They were only asking for a place to sleep while they helped with their grandchildren. My mother said they wouldn't be any trouble at all. They'd brought their own air mattress. They'd help with cooking and cleaning. Really, I should be grateful to have extra help around the house. I stood there, stunned into silence. My 2-bedroom house now had 8 people living in it. That night, I lay in my bed, the only private space I had left, and listened to Tyler and Brittany arguing in the living room, my parents snoring in what used to be my office, and the kids crying. My brand new house, the one I'd worked 10 years to buy, felt like a prison. And then I heard Tyler talking on the phone to someone. His voice carried through the walls. He was laughing. He said his brother was such a pushover. He said they'd totally played him. He said they were living rent-free and planned to stay as long as possible. He said he'd never actually given notice at his rental. He'd been evicted for not paying rent for 3 months. They'd been living in my parents' garage, and this had been the plan all along. Get into my house, establish residency, and then I'd never be able to get them out. I lay there in the dark, realizing I'd been completely set up, and I had no idea how to get out of it. The next week was a living nightmare. I couldn't work from home anymore because my office was occupied by my parents sleeping on an air mattress surrounded by kids' beds. My desk was shoved in a corner of the living room, blocked by Tyler and Brittany's blow-up mattress during the day, and completely inaccessible when they inflated it at night. I found a co-working space 10 miles away that charged $300 a month for a dedicated desk. It killed me to pay it when I had a perfectly good house with a perfectly good office that I couldn't use, but I had no choice. My job required me to be on video calls, and I couldn't do that with kids screaming in the background and Tyler playing video games on my computer 6 feet away. The financial bleeding started immediately. My family ate like locusts. I'd come home with $150 worth of groceries, and they'd be gone in 3 days. My mother cooked huge meals every night using all my nice cookware, leaving everything dirty in the sink for me to clean later. Tyler and the kids would raid my pantry for snacks constantly. My grocery bill went from $200 a month to over $800. Nobody offered to contribute a single dollar. When I brought it up, my mother looked hurt. She said she'd been cooking for everyone. Didn't that count for something? Tyler said he was broke, and I knew that. My father said, "Family doesn't charge each other for food and shelter. That's not how it works." But it wasn't just food. My utility bills exploded. The hot water was always gone because 8 people were taking showers. The air conditioning ran constantly because someone always had it turned down to 65 degrees. My electric bill went from $90 to $270 in a single month. The water bill tripled. Tyler borrowed my car constantly. He'd ask for the keys, saying he just needed to run to the store and wouldn't come back for 4 hours. He'd return it with the gas tank on empty, and twice he brought it back with new dents in the bumper. When I confronted him about the dents, he said it must have happened in a parking lot and he didn't notice. The kids broke things daily. Emma spilled an entire cup of grape juice on my new couch, leaving a huge purple stain. Connor knocked over my TV while roughhousing, cracking the screen. Sophie colored on my walls with permanent marker. Every time something broke, Brittany would apologize but say kids will be kids, and nothing could be done about it. My laptop charger disappeared. Tyler claimed he didn't take it, but I found it in his bag when I went looking for my missing phone charger. He said he must have grabbed it by mistake. I tried to set boundaries. I created a written agreement, outlining that they'd be out in 2 weeks, that they'd pay for any damages, and that they'd contribute to household expenses. I printed it out and asked everyone to sign it. They laughed at me. Tyler said I couldn't be serious. My mother said family doesn't need written contracts. My father said if I tried to enforce something like that, I'd regret it. There was a threat in his voice that I couldn't quite pin down. When I pushed back, my father's expression went cold. He asked me if I liked my job. I said of course I did. He said it would be a shame if my employer found out what kind of person I really was, someone who'd throw his own family out on the street. The threat was clear. 2 weeks came and went. They made no effort to look for a place. When I reminded them of our agreement, Tyler said they'd need a little more time, just another week or 2. Brittany said they'd been looking but couldn't find anything affordable. I knew they were lying. Week 3 turned into week 4. My work performance started slipping. My boss Amanda noticed I seemed distracted in meetings. I was missing deadlines for the first time in my career. I'd been working on a major project for a client that was worth $200,000 to the company, and I'd fallen behind schedule. Amanda pulled me into a one-on-one video call. She said she was concerned. My work had always been exemplary, but something was clearly wrong. Was everything okay? I didn't know what to say. I couldn't exactly explain that my entire family had moved into my house without permission and was destroying my life. It sounded insane. So I said I was fine, just dealing with some personal stuff, and I'd get back on track. She said she hoped so because there was a senior developer position opening up next month, and I'd been the top candidate. But if my performance didn't improve, she'd have to reconsider. That promotion meant a $30,000 raise. I'd been working toward it for 2 years, and now it was at risk because I couldn't focus or sleep or work from my own home. Meanwhile, my family got more comfortable. Tyler started inviting his friends over. Random guys I'd never met would show up, and they'd all hang out in my living room drinking beer and watching sports. They'd leave beer cans everywhere. My house started to smell like stale beer and dirty diapers. The mess was constant. Toys everywhere. Dishes piled in the sink. Trash overflowing. I'd clean up at night, and by morning it would be destroyed again. When I asked for help, my mother said she was busy watching the kids. Tyler said he'd get to it later. Brittany said she was too stressed to deal with housework. My Amazon account was linked to a tablet in the living room for music. I started getting notifications for orders I didn't make. Tyler and Brittany were using it to order things: clothes for the kids, toys, a new video game, a blender. Over $500 in charges before I caught it and changed my password. When I confronted them, Brittany said she thought I wouldn't mind since we were all family. Tyler said I made good money, so what was the big deal? After 5 weeks, I'd had enough. I gave them a firm deadline: 1 week, 7 days. Then I wanted them out. I said it in front of everyone. I said I'd been more than accommodating, but this had gone on long enough. They needed to find their own place immediately. My mother looked at me with tears in her eyes. She said I'd changed. I used to be such a sweet boy, but success had made me hard and cruel. Tyler's face went dark. He said I'd regret this. The next day, I found out what he meant. I was at my co-working space when I got a call from an unknown number. I answered, and it was a police officer. He said there'd been a domestic disturbance report at my address, and they needed to speak with me. My heart dropped. I drove home immediately, terrified something had happened. When I arrived, there were 2 police cruisers in my driveway. The officers met me outside. They said my brother had filed a report claiming I'd assaulted him. Tyler said I'd shoved him and threatened him when he asked about staying longer. He said he feared for his safety and the safety of his family. I was speechless. None of that had happened. The officers asked me to wait outside while they spoke with Tyler. They went inside, and I stood in my own driveway like a criminal. When they came back out, one officer looked skeptical, but the other looked at me like I might be dangerous. Tyler had apparently shown them a bruise on his arm, claiming I'd grabbed him violently. The bruise looked fake to me, like makeup, but the officers had to take the report seriously. They took my statement. I explained the situation, that Tyler's family had been living with me without permission, that I'd asked them to leave, and that I'd never touched anyone. The skeptical officer seemed to believe me. The other wasn't sure. They said they had to file the report, but I wasn't being arrested. However, they advised me to stay away from Tyler and let things cool down. Stay away from Tyler. In my own house. After they left, I went inside. My parents, Tyler and Brittany, were all sitting in the living room. Tyler had a smug look on his face. I asked him how he could lie like that. He said he didn't lie. He said I was being aggressive and threatening, and he had to protect his family. I realized he'd just created an official record that painted me as violent, and I had no idea why. Then my phone rang. It was Amanda, my boss. She asked me to come in for a meeting tomorrow morning. Her voice was serious, formal. My stomach dropped. I asked if everything was okay with the project. She said we'd discuss it tomorrow. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I drove to the office with a sense of dread. Amanda met me in a conference room. HR was there. A woman named Patricia from Human Resources, who I'd only met once at orientation. Amanda looked uncomfortable. She said they'd received a concerning phone call yesterday. Someone claiming to be my mother had called asking to speak to my supervisor. She'd said she was worried about me. She said I'd abandoned my homeless family and was having some kind of mental breakdown. She asked if the company offered mental health resources for employees. She implied I might be dangerous. I sat there, unable to speak. Patricia said they took employee well-being seriously. She asked if I was having any mental health issues, if I needed time off, if I was under unusual stress. I tried to explain the situation, but it sounded insane even to my ears. My family moved in without permission, and now they're trying to destroy my reputation, so I can't make them leave? It sounded paranoid. Amanda said my recent performance issues, combined with this call, had raised concerns. They were putting my promotion on hold, pending resolution of my personal matters. They wanted to make sure I was okay before adding more responsibility to my plate. I'd worked toward that promotion for 2 years, and my mother had destroyed it with a single phone call. I went back to my co-working space and sat in the parking lot. My family had invaded my home, drained my finances, and now they were sabotaging my career. And I had no idea how to stop them. The meeting with HR was humiliating beyond words. I sat there trying to explain that my family had manipulated their way into my house and were now systematically destroying my life. But every word that came out of my mouth sounded like I was having a paranoid breakdown. Patricia from HR kept nodding with this concerned expression, like she was trying to be understanding while also calculating whether I was a liability to the company. Amanda had always been a good boss, supportive and fair, but even she looked uncomfortable. She said they weren't questioning my work ethic or my abilities. They just needed to make sure I was in a good place mentally before they could move forward with the promotion. She suggested I take a few days off to handle my personal situation. I couldn't afford to take days off. I was already behind on the client project. But I could tell from her tone that it wasn't really a suggestion. I drove home feeling numb. A coworker named Derek had been angling for that promotion too. He was less qualified than me, less experienced, but he was friendly with everyone and knew how to play office politics. I'd beaten him on merit alone. But now, with my performance slipping and HR questioning my stability, he had an opening. When I got home, my parents were in the living room with Tyler and Brittany. They all looked up when I walked in, and there was something in their expressions that made my skin crawl. They looked pleased with themselves. I asked if my mother had really called my work. She had the audacity to look hurt. She said she was worried about me. She said I'd been acting strange and aggressive, and she thought my employer should know. She said she did it because she cared. I told her she'd just cost me a promotion I'd worked 2 years for. My father said if I'd been a better son and brother, none of this would have happened. He said this was all my fault for being selfish in the first place. That's when I realized they were doing this on purpose. They weren't just refusing to leave. They were actively trying to trap me, to make it impossible for me to force them out. The false police report made sense now. If I called the cops to remove them, Tyler could claim I was violent. My mother's call to my work established a narrative that I was unstable. They were building a case that I was the problem, not them. I needed help. Real help. The next morning, I looked up attorneys who specialized in property law and tenant disputes. I made appointments with 3 different lawyers for consultations. The first 2 told me basically the same thing. This was complicated. Because my family had been living in my house for over 30 days, they'd established residency. Even though they'd never paid rent, and I'd never signed a lease with them, they had tenant rights under Texas law. I couldn't just change the locks and throw their stuff on the lawn. I had to go through the formal eviction process, which would take a minimum of 30 to 60 days. The third attorney was a guy named Frank Martinez. His office was small and cluttered with files, but he listened carefully to my whole story without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face. He said I was in a bad situation, but it wasn't hopeless. Yes, the eviction would take time. Yes, it would cost money. But the false police report could actually work in my favor if I could prove it was fabricated. The problem was proving it. He said his retainer was $5,000, and the whole process could cost anywhere from $8,000 to $15,000, depending on how much my family fought it. I didn't have that kind of money readily available. My savings were depleting fast between the extra grocery bills, utilities, the co-working space, and everything else. But I didn't have a choice. I paid the retainer on my credit card. Frank immediately sent a formal eviction notice to my house via certified mail, and also handed it to Tyler in person when he came by my house that afternoon. The notice gave them 30 days to vacate. Tyler ripped it up in front of Frank and said he wasn't going anywhere. The eviction process began. Frank filed the paperwork with the court. A hearing was scheduled for 5 weeks out because the courts were backed up. In the meantime, things got worse. 3 days after I served the eviction notice, I got served with papers myself. Tyler had filed for a restraining order against me. The petition claimed I'd been violent, threatening, and erratic. It included the police report from the fake assault, It had statements from Brittany saying she was afraid of me. Even my parents signed affidavits saying they'd witnessed me acting aggressively toward Tyler and his family. All lies. Every single word. But there was a court hearing scheduled, and until then, a temporary restraining order was in place. I was legally prohibited from being within 500 feet of Tyler. Tyler was living in my house. That meant I couldn't go to my own home. I called Frank in a panic. He said this was a dirty tactic, but not uncommon in these situations. We'd fight it at the hearing, which was in 1 week. In the meantime, I needed to find somewhere else to stay. I checked into an extended stay hotel. It cost $89 a night. I did the math. That was over $2,700 a month, on top of my mortgage, which was still being automatically deducted from my account, on top of utilities that Tyler and company were racking up, on top of groceries they were eating, on top of my lawyer fees. I was hemorrhaging money. That week was the worst of my life. I worked from the hotel room, trying to catch up on the client project that was already late. I barely slept. I lived on takeout food because the hotel only had a mini fridge and microwave. I did the math on my finances over and over, watching my savings account drain. At the rate I was spending, I had maybe 3 months before I'd be completely broke. The restraining order hearing came. I sat in a courtroom with Frank while Tyler sat across the aisle with a lawyer my parents had apparently hired for him. The lawyer's name was Gregory Stone, and he had slick back hair and an expensive suit. He clearly cost a lot more than Frank. Tyler testified first. He talked about how I'd become increasingly unstable after buying the house, how I'd grudgingly allowed them to stay but then would have violent outbursts, how I'd grabbed his arm hard enough to leave a bruise, how he feared for his children's safety. Brittany testified next. She cried on the stand. She said I'd screamed at the kids for being too loud. She said I'd threatened to throw their belongings in the trash. She said she'd never seen me act this way before, and it scared her. My mother testified. She said she'd raised me to be a kind, gentle boy, but something had changed. She said I'd become cold and angry. She said she didn't recognize her own son anymore. Then came the evidence I didn't know about. Tyler's lawyer pulled out a laptop and showed video footage from a Ring doorbell camera. I didn't own a Ring camera. They'd installed one without telling me. The footage showed me telling Tyler to get out of my house. My voice was raised. I was pointing at the door. Tyler edited the footage to remove all context, all the parts where he'd been antagonizing me, all the parts that would show I was just trying to get them to leave. In the edited version, I just looked angry and aggressive. There were text messages too. Messages where I'd told them to get out. Messages where I'd said I didn't want them there. Presented without context. They looked like threats. I testified last. I tried to explain everything. The manipulation, the invasion of my home, the financial abuse. But I could tell the judge wasn't fully convinced. I sounded paranoid. Tyler and his lawyer had built a narrative, and my truth sounded far-fetched in comparison. Frank presented our evidence. The lack of any lease agreement. The eviction notice showing they were there without permission. My financial records showing I'd never received rent payments. But it wasn't enough to overcome the emotional testimony and edited videos. The judge extended the restraining order for 60 days pending a full hearing. He said it was better to be cautious when children were involved. 60 days. I was barred from my own house for 60 more days. I walked out of that courtroom feeling destroyed. Frank caught up with me outside. He said not to lose hope. This was just a temporary order. We'd gather more evidence and fight it properly at the full hearing. Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. Tyler's lawyer had filed something else, a civil lawsuit. Tyler was suing me for breach of an oral contract. He claimed that before I bought the house, I'd promised them they could live there. He said we'd had an agreement, and I'd backed out. He was suing me for damages, emotional distress, and the cost of having to find emergency housing. The lawsuit was for $250,000. I stood on the courthouse steps, cars driving by, people walking past living their normal lives. And I realized my family wasn't just trying to take my house, they were trying to destroy me completely. I moved into a different extended stay hotel because the first one was too expensive. This one was $65 a night, which was still nearly $2,000 a month, but it was the best I could find. The room smelled like cigarettes and old carpet. The walls were thin enough that I could hear every conversation, every TV show, every argument from the neighboring rooms. There was a coffee maker that only worked half the time, and a microwave that sparked when I used it. This was my life now. Living in a hotel room that cost nearly as much as my mortgage, paying for a house I couldn't live in, bleeding money from every direction, and watching my career crumble. The client project at work was officially late. Amanda had to apologize to the client and ask for an extension. In 10 years, I'd never missed a deadline. Now I'd missed a major one. The client was unhappy. Amanda was disappointed. And Derek was there, ready to step in and save the day. He volunteered to take over the project. He sent an email to the whole team saying he understood I was dealing with personal issues, and he was happy to help shoulder the burden. It was positioned as concern, but everyone could read between the lines. He was making his move for that promotion. My performance review got pushed back. Amanda stopped including me in certain meetings. I wasn't fired, but I was being sidelined. The HR situation had spread through office gossip. People knew something was wrong with me. They didn't know the details, but they knew enough. I caught coworkers giving me sympathetic looks or quickly ending conversations when I walked by. I'd become that person, the one with drama in their personal life who couldn't keep it together. My extended family had turned against me too. My mother had posted on Facebook about how she was heartbroken that her son had turned his back on family. She didn't mention that they'd invaded my house. She just painted this picture of a struggling family that needed help, and a cold, successful son who refused. Cousins started calling. My Aunt Karen left me a voicemail saying she was disappointed in me. My Uncle Dave sent a text saying family comes first, always. Old family friends commented on my mother's posts, with messages of support for her and condemnation for me. Nobody called to ask for my side of the story. I was completely alone. I'd go to work at the co-working space during the day, then back to the hotel at night. I'd eat takeout food and watch my bank account balance drop. I calculated it obsessively. At this rate, I had maybe 10 weeks before I'd be completely broke. Then what? I'd lose my house to foreclosure because I couldn't make the mortgage payments. I'd lose everything I'd worked for. 6 weeks into living at the hotel, my credit card got declined at a restaurant. I checked my account. I'd hit my limit. I had a second credit card that still had room, but I was piling up debt faster than I could pay it off. That night, I lay in the hotel bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to someone yelling next door, and thought about how completely my family had destroyed me. They'd taken my home, my savings, my career prospects, and my reputation. And they'd done it all while playing the victims. I thought about giving up, just walking away from everything, letting the house go into foreclosure, letting Tyler have it, moving to a different city, and starting over. But that felt like letting them win. The next morning, I got a text from someone I hadn't heard from in years. My college roommate, Marcus. He said he'd seen my mother's Facebook posts and something didn't add up. He asked if I wanted to get coffee and talk. Marcus and I had been close in college but drifted apart after graduation. He'd gone into criminal justice and eventually became a private investigator. I'd heard through mutual friends that he'd started his own small PI firm in Austin. We met at a coffee shop near my hotel. I told him everything, the whole story from start to finish. He listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes on his phone. When I finished, he was quiet for a minute. Then he said this was one of the most blatant scams he'd ever heard, and he'd heard a lot. He said as a friend, he wanted to help. His usual rate was $150 an hour, but for me, he'd do $40. and he'd front some of the work because he believed my story, and because people like Tyler made him angry. I could have cried from relief. I asked what he could do. He said first, he'd dig into Tyler's background, see if there was a pattern. People who pull scams like this usually aren't doing it for the first time. Second, he'd interview my neighbors, get statements, maybe get security camera footage showing when my family moved in and how they'd behaved. Third, he'd look into the restraining order evidence and see if he could prove the videos were edited. It would take time, but he'd find something. He guaranteed it. For the first time in weeks, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Marcus got to work immediately. He had me write down everything I could remember with dates and times. Every incident, every conversation, every piece of evidence I had. Bank statements showing the extra expenses, receipts for all the groceries I'd bought, photos I'd taken of the damage to my house before I was forced out. 3 days later, Marcus called me. He'd found something. He'd been searching online and found multiple forum posts and reviews about Tyler and Brittany. Apparently, they'd pulled similar stunts before. There was a landlord who'd posted about them living rent-free for 4 months before he could evict them. There was a roommate situation that had ended badly. There were multiple people in an Austin area forum warning others about them. Tyler had a pattern. He'd manipulate his way into living situations, refuse to pay, make himself impossible to remove, and then play the victim when people finally forced him out. He'd done this at least 4 times that Marcus could document. Marcus also found something else. There were multiple small claims court judgments against Tyler for unpaid debts. He owed money to a former landlord, to a credit card company, to a guy who'd loaned him $3,000 that was never repaid. Tyler was deep in debt and had been for years. This wasn't just about needing a place to stay. This was about Tyler and Brittany being professional scammers. Marcus kept digging. He interviewed 3 of my neighbors. All of them confirmed that Tyler's family had shown up suddenly with a moving truck. One neighbor, a retired teacher named Helen, had video from her security camera showing the day they arrived. In the video, you could clearly see me trying to turn them away and Tyler pushing his way in. Another neighbor had heard Tyler talking loudly on his phone one night, bragging to a friend about living rent-free and how his brother was too much of a pushover to do anything about it. Marcus collected all of this into a file. Then he looked into Brittany. Her history was even more interesting. She'd filed 3 false police reports in the past for various things. A fake break, in at an old apartment to get insurance money, a false assault claim against an ex-boyfriend, and a complaint about harassment from a coworker that was proven to be fabricated. She had a pattern too. Marcus also got access to Tyler's social media, which wasn't private. There were posts from Tyler complaining about money, asking friends if anyone knew of short-term housing situations, and even one post from 2 months before I bought my house where he'd commented on my announcement about house hunting, saying, "Lucky you, bro. Some of us are struggling out here." It was all evidence that they'd been planning this. While Marcus worked on background information, I met again with Frank, my lawyer. I showed him everything Marcus had found. Frank's eyes lit up. He said this was exactly what we needed. This changed everything. We could use Tyler's history to show the restraining order was part of a pattern of manipulation. We could use the neighbor testimonies to prove Tyler forced his way into my house. We could use his social media posts to prove he'd planned this. Frank immediately filed a motion to dissolve the restraining order based on new evidence. He also filed a motion to dismiss Tyler's lawsuit, arguing it was frivolous and part of a pattern of fraudulent behavior. A hearing was scheduled for the following week. But 2 days before the hearing, something happened that almost broke me completely. The extended stay hotel called. My credit card had been declined for the week's payment. I was behind. I checked my account and realized I'd hit the limit on my second card too. I'd been so focused on legal fees and barely eating that I hadn't been tracking it carefully enough. I called Marcus in a panic. I told him I couldn't pay for the hotel anymore. I was out of money. Marcus said to come stay on his couch for a while. He said we were close to the end of this, and he wouldn't let me give up now. I packed up my few belongings from the hotel and moved into Marcus's apartment. He had a one-bedroom place with a pretty comfortable couch. He refused to let me pay rent. He said I'd pay him back someday when this was over, and I was back on my feet. That night, I lay on Marcus's couch and realized I'd hit rock bottom. I was 32 years old, sleeping on a friend's couch, broke, barred from my own house, with my career hanging by a thread, and my family actively trying to destroy me in court. But Marcus believed in me. Frank believed we could win, and I wasn't going to let Tyler take everything without a fight. The hearing was in 5 days. Everything depended on it. And then Marcus called me with something that changed everything. He said he'd been following Tyler's girlfriend. I asked what girlfriend. Marcus explained that while doing surveillance, he'd seen Tyler meeting up with a woman who wasn't Brittany. He'd followed them to a coffee shop where they'd sat very close, holding hands, clearly romantic. Marcus kept following her. She went to an apartment, and Marcus ran her license plate. Her name was Ashley Henderson. She was a graphic designer who ran a small freelance business. Out of curiosity, Marcus looked at her website and her portfolio. One of her specialties was document design. Resumes, business cards, letterhead, official-looking documents. Marcus had a hunch. He showed Ashley's photo to a neighbor who lived 2 houses down from me. The neighbor said yes. He'd seen that woman visit my house about a week ago. She'd been carrying a laptop bag and stayed for about 2 hours. Marcus's hunch was right. Tyler hadn't just forged the emails himself. He'd hired a professional to make them look authentic. Ashley Henderson was creating fake documents for Tyler, and Marcus had proof. Surveillance photos of her entering my house, her vehicle registered at the scene, and her portfolio showing she had the skills to do exactly what Tyler needed. Marcus immediately took this to the police. This was fraud, conspiracy, forgery, serious crimes. 2 detectives got very interested very quickly. They started their own investigation into Ashley Henderson and her connection to Tyler. The hearing was in 3 days. Everything was coming to a head. But there was one more bomb about to drop. Marcus came to his apartment late one night looking grim. He'd discovered something else while digging deeper into Tyler's plan. Tyler had filed paperwork with the county to add himself to my house deed as a co-owner. He'd created documents claiming I'd verbally agreed to make him a partial owner in exchange for property management services. The paperwork was sitting with the county recorder's office under review. If it went through before we could stop it, Tyler could legally own half of my house. We had 72 hours to stop it, or I'd lose everything. The next morning, Frank filed an emergency motion. We had to stop the county from processing Tyler's fraudulent deed filing before it became official. Frank worked all night on the motion, citing every piece of evidence Marcus had gathered. The forged documents, Tyler's history of scams, the testimony from neighbors, Ashley Henderson's involvement. Everything. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following afternoon. It was being combined with the restraining order hearing since they were related cases. The judge assigned was Judge Patricia Morrison, who had a reputation for being no-nonsense and hating people who wasted the court's time with frivolous cases. That was good for us, Frank said. If we could prove Tyler's pattern of fraud, Judge Morrison would shut him down hard. But we needed everything to come together perfectly. The evidence had to be airtight. The testimony had to be credible. And we needed the police investigation into Ashley Henderson to move fast enough to matter. Marcus spent the day before the hearing tying up loose ends. He interviewed one more neighbor who'd seen Tyler selling my belongings online. He got a written statement from a local electronics store where Tyler had tried to sell my gaming monitor, claiming it was his. The store clerk remembered because Tyler had seemed sketchy and they'd refused to buy it without proof of ownership. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay on Marcus's couch running through every possible outcome. Best case. The restraining order gets dissolved, Tyler's lawsuit gets dismissed, the deed filing gets blocked, and I can go home. Worst case. None of it works. and Tyler ends up owning half my house, while I'm still barred from entering it. The hearing was at 2 in the afternoon. Frank, Marcus, and I arrived early. We set up at our table with 3 large binders of evidence: photos, statements, financial records, social media screenshots, court records of Tyler's past judgments, everything organized and tabbed. Tyler walked in with his lawyer Gregory Stone and my parents. Tyler looked confident, almost smug. He was wearing a nice button-down shirt, probably borrowed, trying to look respectable. Brittany came in a few minutes later with the kids, which surprised me. Stone was planning to use the kids for sympathy. Judge Morrison came in exactly at 2. She was a woman in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled back tight and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She sat down, reviewed the case file for a moment, and then looked up at both tables with an expression that said she'd already decided this better be worth her time. Stone stood first. He began with an emotional appeal, talking about Tyler's family, their struggles, how they'd been promised a home and then betrayed. He painted me as unstable and potentially dangerous, referencing the police report and the Ring camera footage. Then Frank stood up. He didn't start with emotion. He started with facts. He told Judge Morrison this was a case of systematic fraud and manipulation. He said we had extensive evidence proving Tyler had forced his way into my home, refused to leave, and was now attempting to steal ownership through forged documents. He said Tyler had a documented history of this behavior. Judge Morrison looked interested. She told Frank to proceed with his evidence. Frank started with the neighbor testimony. He called Helen, my neighbor, to the stand. She testified about seeing the moving truck, hearing me tell them they couldn't stay, and watching Tyler push his way in anyway. She provided her security camera footage on a USB drive that showed the whole incident. Then Frank called the neighbor who'd heard Tyler bragging on the phone. He testified that he'd clearly heard Tyler saying he was living rent-free and that I was too weak to kick them out. Stone tried to discredit them, suggesting they were just trying to help me because they didn't like having kids in the neighborhood. It didn't land well. Next, Frank brought in the evidence of Tyler's past. The forum posts from previous landlords and roommates, the small claims judgments, the pattern of behavior. Stone objected, saying past issues weren't relevant to this case. Judge Morrison overruled him, saying pattern of behavior was absolutely relevant in a fraud case. Then came the financial records. Frank showed my bank statements, proving I'd spent an extra $6,000 on groceries, utilities, and household expenses since Tyler moved in. He showed my credit card statements for the hotel stays. He showed the retainer I'd paid Frank. Everything documenting how Tyler's presence had financially devastated me. Stone tried to argue that I'd willingly spent that money because we had an agreement. Frank asked him to produce the agreement. Stone said it was a verbal agreement. Frank asked for any evidence of this agreement. Emails, texts, anything. Stone couldn't provide any because none existed. Then Frank dropped the bomb about Ashley Henderson. He showed photos of her entering my house. He showed her vehicle information. He pulled up her website showing her document design services. He explained that Tyler had hired a professional forger to create fake emails and documents to support his claims. Stone's face went pale. Tyler shifted in his seat, looking at his lawyer with panic. Judge Morrison leaned forward. She asked if law enforcement was investigating this allegation. Frank said yes, and at that moment, as if on cue, 2 detectives entered the courtroom and sat in the back row. Their presence spoke volumes. Frank then addressed the forged deed filing. He showed the paperwork Tyler had submitted to the county. He explained that Tyler was attempting to fraudulently add himself as a co-owner of my property based on fabricated documents claiming I'd agreed to give him partial ownership in exchange for services he never provided. Judge Morrison asked Stone if his client had anything to say about these allegations. Stone asked for a moment to confer with Tyler. They whispered urgently for several minutes. I could see Tyler getting agitated, gesturing, shaking his head. Finally, Stone stood up and said his client maintained that there had been a verbal agreement, and any documents were simply to memorialize that agreement after the fact. Judge Morrison asked Tyler directly, "Did you hire someone to create false documents?" Tyler stammered. He said no. He said the documents were real. He said I'd agreed to everything. Frank stood up and said, "We had one more witness." Marcus had been working on this part all morning. He'd contacted Ashley Henderson's roommate, who was angry about Ashley's involvement in illegal activities. The roommate agreed to testify. The roommate came to the stand and testified that Ashley had been working on a project for Tyler. Ashley had mentioned it was creating official-looking documents for a legal case. The roommate had overheard phone conversations where Ashley and Tyler discussed how to make fake emails look authentic, including creating false metadata timestamps. Tyler jumped up and yelled that she was lying. Judge Morrison told him to sit down and be quiet or she'd hold him in contempt. Stone looked defeated. He knew the case was falling apart. Judge Morrison called for a 15-minute recess. She wanted to review the evidence in her chambers. During the recess, I saw my parents talking urgently with Tyler. My mother was crying. My father looked angry and scared. They knew what was coming. When we returned, Judge Morrison had clearly made up her mind. She said she'd reviewed the evidence and found it overwhelming. She said the restraining order against me was based on false pretenses and fabricated evidence. She was dissolving it immediately. She said Tyler's lawsuit for breach of contract was frivolous and without merit. She was dismissing it with prejudice, meaning it couldn't be refiled. She ordered Tyler to pay my legal fees. She said she was referring the matter of forged documents and the fraudulent deed filing to the district attorney for criminal investigation. And then she looked directly at Tyler and said if he wasn't out of my house within 72 hours, she'd issue a warrant for his arrest for criminal trespass. Tyler's face went white. Brittany started crying. My mother gasped. My father stared at the floor. The two detectives in the back stood up and walked toward Tyler's table. One of them said they needed to speak with Tyler outside about the forgery investigation. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. Court was dismissed. I sat there in shock. We'd won. We'd actually won. Frank shook my hand and said this was one for the books. Marcus clapped me on the back. I felt like I could breathe for the first time in 2 months. Outside the courtroom, the detectives were talking to Tyler. I heard them mention Ashley Henderson's name. I heard the word conspiracy. Tyler was trying to explain something, talking fast, but the detectives didn't look sympathetic. My parents came up to me. My mother tried to hug me, saying she was sorry, saying she didn't know it had gone this far. I stepped back. I told them they'd made their choice when they backed Tyler's lies. They'd signed affidavits calling me violent. They'd supported his fraud. They were as guilty as he was. My father tried to argue, but I walked away. Frank had told me not to engage with them. Everything went through lawyers now. That evening, Frank arranged for a police escort to my house. We wanted to make sure Tyler and everyone else left peacefully and didn't destroy anything on their way out. When we arrived, Tyler and Brittany were loading boxes into a rental truck. My parents were helping. The kids looked confused and scared, which I felt bad about, but this wasn't my fault. Their parents had put them in this situation. Tyler saw me and his face twisted with rage. He started to move toward me, but the police officer stepped between us. The officer told Tyler he had until Friday to be completely out. Any violations, any property damage, and he'd be arrested. Tyler turned back to loading the truck, but he was seething. Over the next 3 days, they slowly moved out. Frank advised me to stay somewhere else until they were completely gone to avoid any confrontations. I stayed with Marcus. Each day, I'd stop by to check on the house. Each day, there was more damage. The bathroom mirror was broken. There were holes punched in the walls. The toilet was clogged with something that required a plumber. Trash was left everywhere. The carpets were stained. They were destroying things out of spite. I took photos and videos of everything. Frank said we'd add it to the damages claim. On Friday morning, the deadline day, I went to the house with Frank and the police escort. Tyler's family, my parents, and all their belongings were finally gone. But Tyler had one last surprise for me. As we were walking through, making sure everything was clear, Tyler's truck pulled up outside. He got out with a paper in his hand. He walked up to me, smirking, and handed it over. It was a lease agreement, dated from the day he moved in, signed by both of us. It granted him tenancy for 12 months at zero rent in exchange for property maintenance services. My signature was on it. My heart dropped into my stomach. If this was real, if this held up, Tyler had legal tenancy. The eviction wouldn't matter. He could come back. Tyler said I must have forgotten I signed it. He said he'd been holding on to it for situations like this. He said, "See you in court." He got back in his truck and drove away, laughing. I stood there, the paper shaking in my hand. Frank grabbed it and studied it carefully. He said the signature looked real. Too real. Then I heard Marcus's voice behind me. "Don't worry, it's fake." I turned around. Marcus was standing there with his phone out, looking satisfied with himself. He said he'd been watching from his car down the street. He'd had a hunch Tyler would try one more thing, and Marcus had seen Tyler's girlfriend Ashley visit the house the day before. She'd gone in empty-handed and left with a laptop bag. Marcus had followed her again. He'd watched her through her apartment window working on her computer. He'd used a telephoto lens and gotten photos of her screen. She'd been working on document forgery, creating that lease. But Marcus had something better. He'd contacted the police about Ashley Henderson earlier in the week. They'd gotten a warrant for her phone and computer records. They'd found all her communications with Tyler. Text messages discussing how much she charged for forged signatures. Video of her practicing copying my signature from my driver's license photo that Tyler had somehow obtained. The police were on their way. They were coming to arrest Tyler. And Ashley had just been arrested an hour ago at her apartment. As if on cue, 2 police cars pulled up. The same 2 detectives from the courthouse got out. Tyler's truck was only 2 blocks away, stopped at a red light. The detectives radioed to a patrol car, and within minutes, Tyler was pulled over. We watched from my driveway as Tyler was placed in handcuffs. He was screaming something, but we were too far away to hear. The detectives came to us and took the forged lease as evidence. They said Tyler was being charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, identity theft, and filing false police reports. With Ashley Henderson's testimony, they had an airtight case. Tyler would likely face up to 5 years in prison. One of the detectives told me Ashley had already taken a plea deal. In exchange for testifying against Tyler, she'd get probation and community service. She was cooperating fully. I watched the police car drive away with Tyler in the back seat. After everything he'd put me through, it still felt surreal. Brittany called my phone later that day. She was crying, begging me to drop the charges. She said the kids needed their father. I told her Tyler should have thought about that before he committed multiple felonies. I told her to get a good lawyer because I was also suing them in civil court for all the damages. She hung up on me. My parents tried calling too. I didn't answer. They left voicemails saying they were sorry, that they'd been fooled by Tyler, that they didn't know he'd go this far. But I'd heard Tyler planning this on the phone that first week. They'd known. They'd been part of it. I was done with all of them. That night, I walked through my house, empty for the first time in 2 months. It was damaged. It needed repairs. But it was mine again. I sat on my stained couch in my living room and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The legal aftermath took months to fully resolve, but the main crisis was over. Tyler was charged with 7 counts, 4 counts of forgery, 2 counts of fraud, and 1 count of filing a false police report. His bail was set at $50,000, which my parents couldn't afford, so he sat in county jail awaiting trial. Ashley Henderson testified against him in exchange for her plea deal. She provided all the text messages, showed the police her design files, explained exactly what Tyler had asked her to do and how much he'd paid her. With her testimony and all the physical evidence Marcus had gathered, Tyler didn't have a chance. His public defender advised him to take a plea deal. He'd face less time if he admitted guilt. After weeks of denial, Tyler finally accepted reality. He pled guilty to 3 felony counts in exchange for the others being dropped. The judge sentenced him to 3 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months. Brittany filed for divorce while he was incarcerated. She moved with the kids to somewhere in Colorado to live with her sister. I heard through the family grapevine that she wanted nothing to do with Tyler anymore. She'd finally realized what kind of person she'd married. The civil case moved forward too. I sued Tyler and Brittany for $28,000. Property damage, stolen items, my legal fees, and the cost of everything they'd put me through. The judge ruled in my favor completely. Since Tyler had no assets, the judgment fell on my parents as co-conspirators who'd supported and enabled the fraud. They had to pay. They refinanced their house to come up with the money. It wiped out their retirement savings and put them in debt for the first time in their lives. I didn't feel good about that, but I also didn't feel guilty. They'd made their choices. The extended family dynamics shifted dramatically once the truth came out. My cousins and aunts and uncles who'd condemned me all apologized. Some of them were genuinely sorry. Others just wanted to distance themselves from my parents and Tyler now that everyone knew what they'd done. My Aunt Karen, who'd left that disappointed voicemail, actually came to my house to apologize in person. She brought a casserole and sat in my living room crying, saying she should have asked for my side of the story. I accepted her apology, but things weren't the same. Trust, once broken like that, doesn't just come back. My parents became pariahs in their community. People at their church found out what happened. Neighbors who'd known them for 20 years stopped talking to them. My father had to retire early because the stress was affecting his health. My mother became depressed and isolated. They tried multiple times to reconcile with me. Letters, calls, showing up at my house. Each time, I told them the same thing. They'd chosen Tyler over me, backed his lies, and actively participated in trying to destroy my life. There was no coming back from that. The last time my father came to my door, he looked 10 years older. He said he was sorry. He said they'd just been trying to help Tyler because he'd always struggled. He said family was supposed to stick together. I told him that family wasn't supposed to lie, cheat, and manipulate each other. I told him that enabling Tyler's behavior his entire life had created the monster who tried to steal my house. I said they'd made their bed, and now they had to lie in it. He left, and I haven't seen them since. The house repairs took 6 weeks. The broken mirror, the holes in the walls, the damaged carpets, the clogged toilet that had to be completely replaced. I hired contractors and slowly put my home back together. It cost $12,000, but the judgment against my parents covered it. I renovated while I was at it. New paint throughout, new flooring in the bedrooms. I turned the second bedroom back into my office, this time with a proper lock on the door. I bought a new couch to replace the stained one. I made the house mine in a way it hadn't been before. Work was another matter. The damage to my reputation and the missed deadline had consequences. Derek did get promoted instead of me. He wasn't mean about it, which somehow made it worse. He was gracious and said he hoped things got better for me soon. Amanda called me into her office 6 weeks after the courthouse victory. She said she needed to address everything that had happened. HR had reviewed my case after I provided documentation of the fraud and legal issues. They understood now that I'd been telling the truth about everything. She said she was sorry. The company should have supported me better instead of questioning my stability. But she also said the damage was done. I'd missed a major deadline, lost the client's confidence, and allowed personal issues to affect my work performance. The promotion was off the table for now. However, she said if I could prove myself over the next 6 months, get back to my previous performance level, another opportunity would come up. She believed in me, but I had to rebuild trust. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but it was fair. I'd let my personal crisis affect my work. That was on me, even if the crisis wasn't my fault. I threw myself into work. I stayed late, came in early, volunteered for difficult projects. Slowly, over months, I rebuilt my reputation. Derek turned out to be a decent guy who didn't lord the promotion over me. We actually became friendly. He said what I'd gone through sounded like a nightmare, and he respected how I'd handled it. 8 months after the courthouse hearing, a different senior position opened up. This time, Amanda recommended me without hesitation. I got the promotion, along with a $35,000 raise. It was $5,000 more than the original promotion would have been. During all of this, Marcus became one of my closest friends. After everything he'd done for me, investigating Tyler, letting me stay on his couch, supporting me through the worst time of my life, I owed him everything. I paid him every dollar I'd promised, and I made sure to be there for him the way he'd been there for me. He was the one who introduced me to Rachel. She came to a game night at Marcus's apartment, about 6 months after I'd gotten my house back. She was a marketing manager at a tech startup, smart and funny with dark curly hair and an easy laugh. We hit it off immediately. She knew my whole story because Marcus had told her before she met me. She said she respected how I'd fought back instead of giving up. She said a lot of people would have just walked away and let the family win. We started dating. She was patient with my trust issues and the walls I'd put up after what my family had done. She helped me learn to open up again. A year after the courthouse hearing, Rachel and I were serious. She basically lived at my house even though she kept her own apartment. We talked about her moving in officially, and this time, it felt right. It felt like my choice. I hosted a housewarming party, something I'd never done because of everything that had happened. I invited friends from work, from college, from various parts of my life. Marcus came with his girlfriend. Rachel's friends came. My coworkers came. Even Amanda came and brought wine. The house was full of people I actually wanted there, people who cared about me, people who'd supported me. We ate good food, played games, laughed loud enough that the neighbors probably heard but didn't complain because they liked me. Standing in my kitchen that night, watching Rachel laugh at one of Marcus's stories, seeing my living room full of genuine friends, I realized something. This was what my life was supposed to look like. Not the nightmare my family had created, but this: peace, happiness. People who actually cared. I thought about Tyler sitting in prison. I thought about my parents alone in their house, having lost both their sons and most of their friends. I thought about how they'd tried to take everything from me and ended up losing everything themselves. I'd learned hard lessons through all of this. I learned that the people who claim to love you most can sometimes hurt you worst. I learned that family isn't automatically sacred just because of blood. Real family, real love, is built on respect and support, not manipulation and guilt. I learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's survival. It's self-respect. Saying no to people who want to exploit you isn't cruel. It's necessary. I learned that you can't sacrifice yourself trying to please people who don't respect you. They'll just take more and more until there's nothing left of you. I learned that my worth isn't determined by whether my parents approve of me or whether my brother likes me. My worth comes from how I treat people, how I work, how I live my life. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the smallest space is exactly big enough for the life you're meant to live. My 2-bedroom bungalow that my family mocked and said was too small turned out to be perfect. It was big enough for me, for my future with Rachel, for the friends who actually mattered. It wasn't about the size of the house. It was about who you let inside it. Now, looking back on everything that happened, I wouldn't change my decision. I'd still buy the same 2-bedroom house. I'd still refuse to let Tyler move in. I'd still fight for what was mine. Because giving in to them wouldn't have made things better. It would have just taught them that manipulating me worked, and they'd have done it forever. Standing up for myself cost me my family of origin, but it gave me something better: my self-respect, my peace, my freedom to live life on my own terms. The day I bought my 2-bedroom bungalow, I thought I was just buying a house. Turns out, I was buying my freedom. It cost me more than the down payment. It cost me a family that never really saw me as anything but a resource to exploit. But I gained something worth more than any of it: my self-respect, my peace, and the knowledge that I'd rather live alone in a small house I own than in a mansion where I'm a prisoner. Sometimes the smallest space is exactly big enough for the life you're meant to live. If you've ever dealt with family members who treated you like a resource instead of a person, I want to hear your story. Have you ever had to cut ties with family to protect yourself? How did you handle it? And do you regret it? Leave a comment below and let me know. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories and realize they're not alone in what they're going through. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. I share real stories about people overcoming impossible situations, and I'd love to have you as part of this community. Finally, if you know someone who's dealing with toxic family situations or who needs to hear this message about setting boundaries, please share this video with them. Sometimes people need to know that choosing themselves isn't selfish. It's survival. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it gave you something to think about, maybe even some courage if you're facing your own difficult family situation. Remember, you deserve respect. You deserve peace. And you deserve to live in a home that's actually yours. Take care of yourselves out there. Until next time.